give a little insight into the work of our department, which is called Institutional Research and Planning. So I've been at BC for about a year and a half, and this is really, it's an interesting portfolio. Many institutions have an office of institutional research, other institutions have an office of planning, and it's really interesting how these domains have come together in this department at BC. So overall, my portfolio includes institutional research, which is data collection, reporting, and analysis, space planning. So we allocate space to our different users, whether it's athletics or student services or academics. We keep all the data on and the floor plans for every space, offices, residential, classrooms. And then I have another group that it's called strategic services. So they work with administrative departments on uh, business improvement, organizational analysis, and um, administrative program review. And then I have another department that really is focused on information systems and design. So they program the types of reports that come out from our data systems. And they're really developing their skills in design thinking. So they're offering design thinking workshops around BC. So what's interesting is I have these different modes of thinking all in one department. And I think we're building the skills as an institution to move from collecting data to extracting the intelligence and the analysis from that data, using that for planning purposes, and then moving into assessment. So we're using the data to inform planning and strategy. And sometimes that means all my folks, the different ways of the different modalities of thinking are involved. And sometimes it means only one of the groups are involved. But it's this is, I think, what's fun and sort of unique about this portfolio at BC. Maybe the most popular deliverable that my team produces is called the fact book. We produce it annually, once a year, lots of facts, about 100 pages of data on students, on faculty, on space, on budgets, giving, alumni. And then also, we are in charge of all the compliance reporting to the federal government for IPEDs, for various institutional consortial groups. So we are responsible for ensuring that our data is correct and accurate and submitted on time. Yeah, so I think and really we're very client focused. So we work with, athletics, we work with Res Life, we work with academic affairs, responding to a lot of ad hoc requests for surveys, for data research. So we try to support everyone else's planning and research work. A lot of our time is spent, especially by my institutional research team, on either designing surveys or administering surveys, kind of at BC, which are part of a national survey administration. So surveys are one way of incorporating student feedback and understanding quality through the student user perspective, right? We design homegrown surveys. For example, right now we have one that is out in the field. It's called the BCU EQ, the Boston College Undergraduate Experience Questionnaire. And the questions range from, their experiences in the classroom, their experiences with the co-curricular programs, and their experiences with, the faith-based programs that BC conducts as well. From these types of surveys, we can get sort of an overall sense of the student experience. And if we want to understand a more focused drill down a little more, then we can conduct focus groups if we have kind of further questions we want to understand about um, why did a certain population of students respond that they had a certain this kind of experience with a certain program or a certain track or a certain course. Um, Ultimately, we try to do this. Ultimately, all of this should benefit our students, right? We want the survey is one way of getting feedback so that we can improve our programs. And that's the quality. So I will always argue with folks, we want to do a survey. And I will say, why do you want to do a survey? What questions are you asking? Who do you want as part of your audience, and what are you going to do with it? If they cannot tell me what they're going to do with it, I will say go back and think about it. We have a lot of, we conduct maybe 2 to 4 surveys a year. We have a survey rotation cycle so that we are not asking the same population of students the same questions every year, because then we won't see the change, right? And so I think even doing a 3 or 4 year cycle helps us look at that trend information so we can track, okay, they rated this program X, not so great in this year, but because we asked them and they told us what wasn't working, then we have 2 or 3 years to build those improvements. And the great thing is seeing in 3 or 4 years that the ratings or the experience has improved. Other benefit of participating in national survey administrations is that we can choose a comparison group and then have a benchmark, right? So we're we could look at other Jesuit schools, or we could, sometimes we look at schools within the ACC, within our sports network. Sometimes we look at schools that are within a range of our US News rankings. So by seeing, it's kind of a competition, right? There's no, that's not, we're not hiding that, but just seeing where we track, and then also looking at schools that we might aspire to, like how are they doing certain things? What are their students saying? It just gives us a good check and kind of gets us out of our bubble, right? To see how other schools are, how students in other schools are experiencing similar types of programs or asking similar types of questions. I think so. When I was working at RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, which was my last institution, one part of my portfolio was to build assessment practice, right? So I started attending these conferences and going to these symposia, kind of development training on building assessment. And one of the uh, one of the events that I went to, I went to the keynote speaker. I said, it's really hard to kind of build, assessment practice in art school, which is, quite subjective, right? The idea of telling my painting professors to develop a rubric to evaluate a painting, I think they will come throw tomatoes and eggs at me. But she said, you're actually wrong. Art and design schools are always assessing. She goes, how many times do you have a critique? Some courses do it once a week, some monthly. You have a, a midterm critique, a final critique. So you're always assessing the development of the student through their work in front of peers, in front of other critics, other faculty, other visitors. So in terms of assessment of learning, it's it's happening maybe less formally, but with more regularity than other types of institutions. So that was an interesting kind of learning moment for me. And I went back and I told my faculty, I was like, you're doing this all the time. You're just not articulating it or collecting the information that you're seeing in order to tweak the course or to tweak the sequence of your curriculum. Building that intentionality into, you know, um, collecting that data from your critiques is the first way to build kind of this quality and assessment practice. So that's kind of, the micro level, the course and learning outcome level. I think on the broader scale, accreditation is one of the platforms, is one of the methods that we begin to understand quality assessment in this country. So we have six, regional accreditors, and then I don't know how many hundreds of professional accrediting bodies, right? For each discipline, for each kind of professional track has its own accreditation. And I've been active both in the regional, here in the Northeast. NETCHI, New England Council for Higher Education, is the oldest, I think, regional accrediting body. And also, if as I talk to my colleagues across the country, they say it's the easiest. Um, because SACS, the Southern States one, is the hardest. But I don't think it's the easiest. I think it's because they're very focused on evaluating institutions based on their mission, right? It's not one size fits all. If you say this is your mission, then your organization, how you use your resources, how you evaluate your faculty or develop new programs, should always align with your mission. Um, and then I've also been involved with accreditation for NASA, which is the National Association for Schools of Art and Design. So professional accreditation takes a much more focused track where you're looking at courses and degree programs, and the very focused also on the types of facilities that enable this kind of teaching and learning. So I think, it's if you talk to faculty, they will say accreditation is the stick, is the stick. Why do we have to do this? I have been like, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't care. And I said, accreditation is our key to federal financial aid. It's a key to mobility and transfer for our students. If we don't participate in this, how will we find that money that supports, scholarships and aid for our students? And I think part of it, one of the things I led the 10-year accreditation at RISD, and wrote the report. And it was a big effort, but one thing that worked after much resistance from my faculty was like, think about this as having a critique for our institution. How are we thinking about the ways that we do things, the ways that we teach, the ways that we learn, with an eye to making the product, the artwork, the institution better? And I think that was when I was able to put it in their vocabulary and in their terms, they actually engaged. They engaged with it. Um, and then kind of on the international scale, yes, I've been involved in accreditation of, in foreign, with two institutions in France. But the interesting thing is these were institutions in France that were seeking American accreditation. So they had to demonstrate that they could operate like an American institution of higher education. So there was a lot to learn in terms of um, French labor laws are completely different from American labor laws, and how do they adapt so that they can prove they're more like us? Rank and tenure is not typical. They are not required to report race or ask, race, ethnicity questions of their students and their faculty. So just being exposed to this type of organization, how it um, where it is situated in a country that has completely different higher education structure, right? Uh, has been really fascinating. And then also the other, just my own personal experience. Um, my daughter chose to spend her 4 years of college abroad at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. And um, just seeing how they don't have a student affairs infrastructure the way that we do. There's no dean who, if you don't show up, the dean's not going to email you and see if you're okay. You are, it's your responsibility to show up at your tutorials, to show up to read. If you don't show up, you can show up for exams and you can still pass, I think. But it's a very different kind of model of responsibility and being like you have to own your own path, right? You have to own your own, you have to own your choices, and the consequences of those choices in a way that I think is very different from kind of the residential structure with a kind of a student affairs platform that we know from our institutions here. Okay, nuggets of wisdom. I believe in kind of, like I mentioned at the start, different modes of thinking. Your solutions are stronger when you have divergent modes of thinking contributing to the solution. And it might not be pretty, it might be kind of tension filled, but I think it's the one way of operating that will get us farther than where we are now. Um, I think my provocation will be, how do you center diversity, equity, and inclusion into your assessment practices? How are you disaggregating data and being more inclusive of the range of identities that our students represent today? Um, how are we beginning to think about equitable assessment practices that um, are open to the different cultural contexts that our students are bringing to our institutions? Like, I don't have an answer, but these are things that I think we should all be thinking about, if we are going to kind of center, equity into our work. We all have to be thinking about these things together. Who are our audiences? I think the other thing is, when we think about data and assessment, all our students are looking at data points every minute of the day. How many likes did my post get? Who responded? How many followers does this, influencer have? How can we begin to bring more data literacy to our work so that we are kind of using that critical thinking to gain the intelligence from our data, kind of understanding the values of one, ahead of the other. I think that's really important to think about. It's a data saturated culture. How can we teach them to be more critical about the data that they're looking at and understanding and processing? Um, just like, you can tell, my husband tells his students, okay, where did you get this? Wikipedia. Is that really where you want to get where you want to get your sources, right? So kind of being more critical about data. And then, again, coming from an art and design background, um, and understanding that our audiences, have a rate, are bringing multiple intelligences to the way they understand. How are we kind of presenting this information? How are we presenting, quality and assessment information? to visual learners versus auditory learners versus tactile learners? How are we thinking about the ways this information is absorbed and understood? And then I think finally, another provocation is, how do we make kind of um, quality improvement, assessment, all of this sustainable? Not just sustainable in terms of kind of green practice, but sustainable in terms of, our own kind of energies and resources, human health, ecological health, um, so that it has a longer life and is intrinsically contributing to the just the health of all our organizations, because the quality has to be associated with our health. We should, there's no quality and assessment just for its own sake. It should be contributing to our health and the long-term viability of our institutions. So how do we think about what are the sustainable practices that can be embedded into the ways we think about quality improvement?